Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from the Tenant Management Organisation. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we are. I now call Mr. David Gibson for the TMO.
Good. Thank you.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibson. Would you like to sit down and make yourself comfortable? Right. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Gibson, good morning.
Good morning.
Can I start by thanking you very much for coming here today and assisting us with our investigations? We are very grateful to you. If during the course of my questions I ask you a question which you don't understand, I can put it another way or repeat the question, just please say. Could you also please keep your voice up so that the transcriber who sits to your immediate right can get down everything you're saying, and so that others who are not in this room can hear what you're saying very clearly? Also, can I just give you a tip? If you shake your head or nod, the no or yes, as the case may be, doesn't go onto the transcript, so you do have to say no or yes. We're going to take 2 breaks during the course of the day, but if you need any break at any other time, please just indicate and we can take a short break. Now, I'm going to start by putting statements to you. You have, I think, made a total of 4 witness statements to the inquiry. They should be in a folder on your desk in front of you, but everything I'm going to show you will appear on the screen in front of you as well. Can we go first, please, to TMO 50887. This is your statement dated the 23rd of January 2019, and I'll call that your first statement, or your January 2019 statement, possibly. Is that your first statement?
It is, yes.
Yeah, and then we go to TMO 00842310. This is your statement of the 5th of September 2019, and I'll call that your second statement. Is that your statement?
It is.
And then you made a third statement on the 6th of February 2020. I'll call that your third statement. That's at TMO 00864675, please. Is that your third statement, which you called your additional statement?
It is.
And then your fourth statement is dated the 3rd of October, which is TMO 00879742. That's your fourth and final statement, I think, isn't it?
It is.
Have you read those statements recently?
I have.
And can you confirm that, subject to some corrections perhaps you want to make later, that their contents are true?
They are.
Have you discussed your statements or your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
No.
I'm going to begin with your background, qualifications and experience. And just to put a little bit of context around that, if I may, you were the TMO's head of capital investment from the 25th of February 2013, I think, to the 30th of June 2016. Is that right?
That's correct.
And was that your first role in a TMO or an ALMO?
It was, yes.
Now, by way of background, just to give you some help, as at February 2013, the Grenfell Tower Refurbishment project had started, yes?
That's correct.
And it was a separate project from the Kensington Academy Leisure Centre, or CALC project, as we call it.
It was.
Or it had grown out into a separate project, certainly, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. And Leadbitter, at that time, was the main contractor, or proposed main contractor, on the Grenfell Tower project.
That's correct.
And at that time, you were looking forward to Leadbitter being the main contractor.
My understanding at the time that Leadbitter were not engaged in the process, so I'm not quite sure whether there was actually an appointment of them. There were discussions with them.
You're quite right. There was not yet an appointment.
Yeah.
Can we then go against that general background to paragraph 5 of your first statement on page 1? That's TMO 50887.
Yeah.
And you say there that you qualified as an architect from Queen's University Belfast and North London Polytechnic. and you started your career in a small architect practice in London, working on a range of housing refurbishments, prior to working as an architect for Hackney Council for 7 years, from 1981 to 1988. Then you go on to say that you were in private practice for 2 years, and then you joined Circle 33 as a senior technical officer. Now, in your 3rd of October 2020 statement, your very recent one, your fourth, you sought to correct parts of your first witness statement there because they're inaccurate or you want to word them differently.
That's correct.
That's right. And one of the things you say is at paragraph 5 of your first witness statement that you weren't an architect at Hackney Council, but an architectural assistant. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you just tell us very briefly what the difference is?
I would be working to a project architect, so assisting a project architect. Most of what I was working on at that time would have been preparing drawings for and plans for a particular scheme, mostly new build housing and some refurbishment of street properties.
Now, you refer to working on a range of housing refurbishments before you joined Hackney Council. What work did you do for Hackney as an architectural assistant?
I worked on a number of new build housing schemes and street properties, refurbishment of street properties. So major works to street properties.
When you say street properties, do you mean houses at street level?
The traditional London street
Right,
properties, yes.
So not high-rise blocks?
Not high-rise
I
blocks.
follow. And you say that was new build. So do I take it from that not refurbishment, or did you do refurbishments as well?
The street properties would be refurbished.
They would be refurbishments, I see. And is it right that while you were at Hackney, you obtained your Part 2 and Part 3 qualifications?
That's correct.
I follow. And you then went to ARC UK, I think, after that, didn't you?
No, ARC UK is the architect's registration. I went to a small architectural practice.
I follow. I'm sorry, that's my misunderstanding of the name of it.
Yeah.
What was the architectural practice that you joined?
A&Q partnership.
A&Q. And what work did you do for A&Q?
Similar work to what I had been doing in Hackney. The practice had been set up over 2 years before from people who had worked in Hackney.
I see.
The practice at that time was growing and they were recruiting staff, and I was asked to join them.
Right. And you were there, just to be clear about dates, between 1987 and 1991.
That's correct.
So 4 years, not the 2 years you said in your first statement.
87 to 1990, I think.
Right. Okay. I think you say 1991 in your statement. It doesn't matter. Yeah. But longer than the 2 years you originally said in your first statement. Is that right?
There must be an error.
Okay.
Because I started with Circle in 1990, December 1990.
December 1990.
Yeah.
Okay. That's Circle 33.
Yes.
All right. And during your time in the private architectural practice, down to the end of 1990, did you do any refurbishment of high-rise blocks?
No.
You didn't. Now, turning to your work at Circle 33, which is your first witness statement of paragraph 5, where we find the first reference to it, you say there that your work as a senior technical officer ranged from dealing with major repairs to development.
Yes.
When you say major repairs to development, were you working as an architect?
No. When I first joined them, there was actually Circle Architects were part of Circle 33, but after a few months, that was absorbed into the main property department of Circle 33.
I see.
And didn't really exist anymore.
So what was your role, your professional role within Circle 33?
It was there was a restructuring, and it was a senior technical officer.
Was that akin to the practice of an architect? Or was it the practice of an architect?
Probably less so. It depended on what we were working on. I did one scheme where I was the employer's agent on major repairs to tenanted low-rise flats. And then as that progressed, I was working within the development department, and the two departments had come together, and I was working on then development opportunities, which may be, I think the major one I worked on at that time was a conversion of a former nurses' home to provide 42 new flats and maisonettes, but 5 stories high.
Right,
Yeah.
I see. Circle 33, was that social housing?
Yes, it was.
It was. And the major repairs to development, I think you've told us what those were.
Yeah.
Those were the repairs to tenanted low-rise flats, is this right? And then development opportunities.
Yes.
And you mentioned the nurses' home, I
Yeah.
see. Now, during your time before you moved to the TMO, beyond what you've just told us, what other experience did you gain of regeneration projects such as that at Grenfell Tower?
Nothing.
Right. Did you ever receive any training on asset regeneration projects?
Old Ford Housing Association, where I worked for the last 2009 to 2013, were a group member within the now Circle 33 became Circle. It had a group structure. Old Ford was originally under Circle 33 and became a housing association in its own right, or a group member in its own right, and they were a regeneration organisation. They had taken transfer of stock from Tower Hamlets, and that was mostly new build. The first tranche, I wasn't involved with that, but then my involvement became on the Parkside Estates regeneration, where we took transfer of those properties, I think about 3,000 properties.
Right.
So it was a regeneration work, but probably more decent homes type work than major works to a single property.
Right. Did you have specific professional training for that, or did you learn on the job, as it were?
No, that was working as the client.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Right, I follow. Right,
All of this was working as the client.
I see. What experience or training did you have of running construction projects as the client?
As the client, it's only in the early part of my career I was running construction projects within the Circle 33 at that time.
Right.
As my career progressed, I was much more of a management position, so I would set up the projects, I might procure them, and others would deliver.
Right. Were you registered with the Architects Registration Board throughout your career, or from the time you qualified as an architect?
When I qualified, I registered until 1991.
I see. So
So
during
it was
your
no
time,
longer it was no longer relevant to the type of work I was doing.
I see. So during your whole time at Circle 33, and when that morphed into Old Ford in 2009, you no longer retained your registration as
No, I wasn't working as an architect.
I see. During your period, and I'm interested in particularly the period, the Old Ford period, if you
Yes.
like, from 2009, did you carry out or obtain any CPD in each year? Continuing professional development.
We would have had opportunities, but I wasn't compiling a CPD logbook. I didn't have any need to.
Right.
But we did have
Were you a
training as necessary.
I'm sorry, yeah, you didn't. Okay, were you a member of the RIBA during that period?
I've never been a member of the
Right.
RIBA.
Was there any way in which you maintained your knowledge and competence and your finger on the pulse of industry developments?
Well, only in terms of working within the industry. We're working with contractors and consultants. I would have had training in contracts to some degree, various contracts, etc. Some of the consultants we use would do training that could be used for CPD. So we would have workshops, possibly lunchtime seminars, that type of thing.
I see. Where you were the recipient of the training
Yes.
rather than the giver. I see. And were any of those workshops on procurement of materials
No,
or on design?
no.
Still sticking with your time before you joined the TMO in 2013, Mr. Gibson, did you do any training in relation to fire safety?
I recall having half-day training from, I believe it was an ex-fire officer, on some of the causes of fires in blocks of flats.
When was that?
I would think it was probably about 2008, 9, not...
Right. And do you remember the specific focus or particular?
Mostly fire doors was the main focus. And do not assume that because something has been tested as a fire door, it remains as a fire door. Otherwise, if you alter how that door is fitted, because it's tested within the frame that it sits in, if you change that at any time, it may no longer be a fire door.
I see. Did you receive any training in relation to fire safety considerations for high-rise buildings in particular?
Nope.
What about training or knowledge in respect of suitability of different materials and design features for residential buildings?
Not any specific training.
No. Do I take it, therefore, that it would follow that you never received any training and had no relevant experience at all specifically on cladding on high-rise buildings and the fire considerations relating to cladding?
Grenfell Tower is the only cladding, high-rise cladding I've ever been involved with. I don't think even low-rise cladding I've been involved with.
Right.
Yeah.
Turning then to your time at the TMO, can I ask you to look at your second statement, please? TMO 30842-310, page 2. And I want to look at paragraph 6, please, with you. You mention health and safety training there. And at paragraph 6, you say, I recall receiving training in health and safety throughout my career. However, I cannot be sure whether this was with the TMO or with the housing organisation I worked at before I joined the TMO. This training was on the general health and safety responsibilities of property managers. I also recall receiving some fire safety training that was delivered by ex-fire service officers. Now, did that training, while you were with the TMO, from ex-fire service officers, when was that, do you remember? Or are you referring there to the...
That's the same training
Oh, I see.
we've already discussed.
Right, I see. So when you were at the TMO, what training in health and safety focusing on fire did you receive?
I didn't personally receive any. I think there were some opportunities for us, but I think I put that out to my team members and other people who might need it. I think some did go, those that could. I think I managed to trace one back, and that for the training being provided, I was actually on leave. The other one, I don't know what happened. I would have gone if I could have gone, but I probably had a clash of meetings.
Who was responsible within the TMO for ensuring that relevant staff members engaged on particular projects received appropriate fire safety training?
I would have responsibility for identifying training needs for the staff that I manage, and would discuss those with them, discuss that with them on an annual basis. My manager would identify training needs for me, but as a client, I had a general knowledge of safety, but more in terms of how to manage buildings once they were built.
Right. You say your manager would identify training needs for you. Would that have been Peter Madison?
Yes.
I see. Did he ever identify any specific training needs for you?
We were using consultants and designers generally, so we were acting as the client.
Right.
So that wouldn't be the sort of training we'd be talking about.
No. Did Peter Madison ever identify any training needs for you?
I don't recall any specific training identified.
Now, you say you were responsible for the training needs of the staff you managed.
Yes.
Did you ever identify a need for your staff to be trained on fire safety relating to, staff generally, anything at all?
No, but they did have opportunity to go to the training that we've already discussed that was available at that time. I think on one occasion, and some people did go because they were available to go.
They went because they were available to go?
Yes.
Does that mean that they wouldn't go if they weren't available?
It means that there could be a clash of
Right.
meetings. It wasn't mandatory.
Did you not, as their manager, not seek to rearrange their diaries so that they could go to those training events that you identified as necessary for them to go to?
Sorry, I didn't identify that, the one we were talking about, as a training need. It was an opportunity.
Yes. My question really was that where you saw an opportunity for your staff to be trained on fire safety matters, did you not prioritise their diaries so that they were free to go?
No, they generally managed their own time, and depending on what different members of staff had different experiences and different needs, but I never identified a need for them to have that particular training.
And I see. And does that apply to your time working on the Grenfell Tower project?
Yes.
So do we take it that during your time on the Grenfell Tower project, you never identified a need for training on fire safety for any of your staff working on that project?
I did not.
You did not. I'm going to ask you some questions about the Lacknell House fire in a little bit of detail throughout your evidence, later on in your evidence. But before I do, can I just ask you, at the time of your appointment to the TMO in 2013, were you aware of other historic fires in exterior cladding structures on high-rise buildings?
Lacknell House is the only one I had knowledge of at that time. There's some, not in this country, the Dubai ones that have been referenced that I would have some knowledge of, but not in terms of what the causes were.
Right. Well, I'll give you a list and see what you knew and didn't know. And I'm not looking at your knowledge now, Mr. Gibson. To be clear, this is your knowledge as at February 2013
Understood.
and thereafter. Knowsley Heights, 1991.
I don't particularly recall, no.
Garnet Court in Irvine in 1999.
I don't recall
Right.
the detail.
You mentioned Dubai. I'll come to that in a moment. Lacrosse in the Lacrosse building in Melbourne in 2014. Did that cross your radar?
As an item on the news, possibly.
Right. You mentioned Dubai. Were those the fires in 2015 or the UAE fires in 2012 to 13?
I'm not sure which one. I just recall Dubai and seeing news on television. Some fires.
Did you remember discussing any of those fires, those Dubai UAE fires, with anybody within the TMO from 2013?
No, because they weren't generally relevant to the work we were doing.
Right. Do I take it from that you never received any information or training or briefing on the lessons learned from the UAE or Dubai fires?
No.
I see. Now, I'll come back to Lacknell House in due course. Can I look first, please, at your role at the TMO when you joined? In your first witness statement at paragraph 7, if we can have that up, please. That's TMO 50887 at page 2. you say that you were invited to apply for a role at the TMO through an agency. At that time, Mr. Gibson, did you know anyone else at the TMO?
I did, but I didn't know they were at the TMO.
Who did you know?
Robert Black used to work within the Circle Group.
And, okay, anybody else? When you arrived, did you find that you knew people already?
Carol McGarry, who was in my, was one of the project managers within the capital reinvestment team. I had worked, well, I didn't work with her. She had worked at the same time as me at Hackney, and she had a short spell at Circle 33.
Right. Now, if we can look at paragraph 8 of this statement, please. You say there, in the last 3 lines, in summary, the job entailed an overview of what needed to be delivered during the course of a 5-year programme to identify and procure works and resourcing through project managers to deliver. And the job title, as you've explained earlier in the paragraph, was to support the Director of Assets and Regeneration on the development and maintenance, etc. So, at this point, when you applied for the job, did you have experience of that role? In other words, an overview of the delivery of a major work from start to finish?
Yes.
You did. And that was from the old Ford work you were doing in Tower Hamlets, was it?
It was, because that was regeneration of 5 estates, 3,000 properties.
Now, you reported, when you arrived, to Peter Madison, didn't you?
Correct.
And he reported to Sasha Jevons, yes?
Correct.
And she reported to Robert Black?
Correct.
Yes. And when you started at the TMO, I think this is right, Paul Duncan reported to you.
Correct.
So we have the chain of command.
Yes.
And then I think it's right that in the September of 2013, Claire Williams took over from Paul Duncan.
Correct.
Now, you've mentioned 2 other project managers reporting to you in your evidence. How many people in total would you say reported to you?
3 project managers, 2 resident liaison officers.
And those 3 project managers, were they each on different projects?
Yes, they each had a portfolio of projects.
They each had their own portfolio of projects. How many projects in total, when you arrived at the TMO, were you given to oversee?
It's difficult to say. There were not many active projects. There were a number of historic projects that needed to be resolved, and there were some historic issues with. There had been, I think there were some cyclical projects ongoing on site, and we were trying to maximise spend for that year end. So at that time, we were trying to identify works to procure for the following year, whilst we looked at setting up a longer-term partnering arrangement with contractors. So a little work was piecemeal at that time. The types of projects were piecemeal in terms of what we could deliver.
Right.
There were often projects needed a very long lead in because we had about 1/3 leaseholders within the stock, and that required us to start further back in terms of informing them of future works.
Okay, so you've given us a fair picture of what you were asked to do. More specifically, were you given a particular brief when you arrived by Peter Madison for your role in relation to the Grenfell Tower project?
No. I knew delivery would come under me, but at that time, I think both Peter and myself were trying to understand the project.
Right. I see. And he'd only just arrived the month before,
Yes.
I think. Now, just on Peter Madison, was there a division of responsibilities between you and him?
Certainly he was the strategic lead, if we're talking about Grenfell in particular.
Yes. He was the strategic lead.
Yes.
Where was the dividing line between responsibilities? What sort of decisions would he take that you wouldn't, or that you would take that he didn't need to? Can you give us a very brief feel for that?
In most meetings we attended together, but Peter would I think he would set the scene.
Right.
In terms of communicating what we needed to do, what we needed to understand about, if we're talking about Grenfell in particular, and how we needed to go forward.
I see. So
in terms of when things were set up and we were ready to deliver, then I took on more of a role.
And what kind of decisions would be passed up the chain to the executive team?
On Grenfell, we would report, I think, monthly to the programme board. And then obviously, in regards to letting contracts, etc., you needed board approval, so that would go to the board.
Very well. Can I then turn to your relationship with Paul Duncan? Now, when you started at the TMO in February 2013, Paul Duncan was already there, wasn't he? And he was already working on the Grenfell Tower project. And then I think we know Peter Madison joined in the January of 2013. So you and Peter Madison had to play catch-up, really, in terms of understanding what had gone on previously with that project. Yeah. And were you given a briefing or a handover pack or a discussion when you joined in relation to Grenfell Tower specifically?
There was no handover pack for any of the work. I met with the individual project managers and they briefed me on their projects. On Grenfell, I also looked at whether it was a Stage C or Stage D report from Studio E, which give me a good background on what was contained within the scheme at that time and what the scheme was.
Yes, I see. I follow. So you were essentially briefed by the managers who were already on the project?
Yes. Paul Duncan and the information that was available.
Now, in your first witness statement, you say at paragraph 11, in the first line, you say, upon my appointment to TMO, I identified a need to recruit additional project managers. Was that specifically on the Grenfell Tower project, or was that overall?
No, I think there is a slight error there. I had 3 temporary project managers. What I wanted to do was to recruit permanently to all those posts. And the recruitment that we carried out was for 3 project managers.
Was that overall or specific to Grenfell?
No, overall.
Overall. I think you say temporary project managers. One of those was Paul Duncan. He was only
Yes, I had 3 interims.
Yes, okay. Were you concerned that the capital investment team that you were overseeing was under-resourced or lacked experience in any way?
I was concerned that there were a number of temporary staff there. I wanted to go through a recruitment process to get people with the right skills and ability to run the projects. They were generic project manager roles, so not specifically for Grenfell.
Right. Even generically, I'll repeat my question, were you concerned that the members of the capital investment team that you were overseeing, temporary though they were either there either weren't enough of them or lacked experience in any way?
I think we had enough, but there was possibly lacking experience.
Right. And would you say that applied to Paul Duncan in your view at the time?
Possibly. I didn't take a strong view. Paul was communicated to me what he needed to communicate, but I don't know if he was proactive enough to take things forward on his own without assistance.
And what gave you that sense? Do you remember?
Because I didn't see him taking a lead in the project. The project had stalled, so he had stopped.
I see. And I think you do say in your first statement that he wasn't considered sufficiently experienced for the requirements of the role. What kind of experience did you actually need that he wasn't giving you?
We went through the normal recruitment process. So people would provide supporting statements with what they had done previously and how it matched with our requirements. And then there was an interview process with both Peter and myself. And
No, I'm sorry, let me cut you off.
Yeah.
I'm asking, what kind of experience did you need that Paul Duncan didn't have?
I think I needed more rounded experience. And in the industry, there are a lot of people who've come from various backgrounds who move around organisations and have quite short stays and become project managers. They don't necessarily have project management background, although we weren't necessarily looking for a project manager. It's a generic role within the organisation. But people with experience of, as a client, delivering a project, because we would generally have consultants and contractors and a contractual arrangement.
So were you looking for somebody on the Grenfell Tower project who had experience of delivering a project as client?
Yes.
Thank you. Can we then turn to Claire Williams as the next
Yes.
topic? And I'd like to take you to your first witness statement of
Yeah.
paragraph 12 on the next page, please. And you say there that Claire Williams was one of a number of applicants,
Yeah.
this is the first line, who applied for the post of project manager. I'd known her for many years through our employment with Circle 33. Just very briefly, what was your work relationship with Claire Williams at Circle 33?
It varied. On the scheme I talked about where I was the employer's agent, the technical officer, she was the project officer. So that was the refurbishment of 42 flats.
Right.
I then became...
So did she report to you on that?
No,
She didn't?
no.
Okay. Did she report to you at all on any projects while at Circle 33?
Yes, there was a period probably around 2019, or around about 2000, for about 2 years, she reported to me. But that was, she had much more of a planning role in identifying what works needed to be delivered by others.
I see. Did you invite her to apply for the role at the TMO, or did she just do that off her own bat?
I had told her there was an opportunity.
I see. Did you interview anybody other than Claire Williams for the role for which you eventually appointed her?
Yes, I think we interviewed in total at least 5 people. We had used an agency to identify candidates. It had been publicised in the press, but at that time in the industry it was very difficult to get people with the right levels of experience.
Yeah.
And I've often had to ask around the industry when I needed staff as to who is available or who might be interested.
I see. Looking at the third sentence of your paragraph 12 there, you say there, Peter Madison and I interviewed her for the job, and she was seen to be well suited to the post, not least because of her experience of dealing with tower block refurbishment in the past and her skills and experience dealing with resident consultation. This was known to be a particular requirement in relation to the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, for which he was being engaged, where the residents would remain in situ during the refurbishment work. Now, on that point, did you want Claire Williams for the role because she had dealt with residents in occupation during major refurbishment works in the past?
Yes.
And that was to be her focus on Grenfell, was it?
No, part of the focus. There are other responsibilities in terms of liaison with internal stakeholders.
Yes. Indeed. But it was, I think, to be a particular focus of hers on the Grenfell Tower project, among others.
Yes, because it was a large number of residents in situ that were going to have...
Did she have any construction qualifications, as far as you were aware?
She didn't need any for the role that we were appointing to.
Did she have any experience of managing and delivering a complex residential refurbishment as a client, so far as you knew?
which she had worked on. She was also a project manager on Old Forward at the time I left and the time I was there, but there was another manager in between. So I had a regeneration manager under me.
Right.
And he appointed her as a project manager and thought very highly of her.
Do you know whether she had any experience of managing the delivery of a complex high-rise refurbishment as a client?
We were recruiting for the generic role, so we weren't specifically looking at a project manager for Grenfell at that time. Once I'd gone through the recruitment process, I looked at the people I had posted. At that time, I only put in post, or confirmed in post, 2 project managers, one being Claire and one being another member of staff who had already been there. But I looked to see who was the best fit.
Right. And did either of those 2 have any experience of managing the delivery of a complex high-rise refurbishment?
It depends what you mean by managing delivery as
Well,
a client, but I
Seeing,
don't...
seeing the
no.
project through to its end?
Not, I don't think, no, I don't think any of the others had.
Did any of them, or either of them, have any experience of a project involving the overcladding of a high-rise residential building?
I don't think so. We weren't specifically recruiting for Grenfell.
Right. Now, in the lower third part of paragraph 12, you say, Claire was also required to respond to contractor needs and to pass on and assimilate their reports of progress and to inform the TMO and the TMO board. Again, she was highly experienced and skilled at this and performed this task to a high standard. In case there should be any misunderstanding, there was no requirement on Claire to carry out the technical aspects of the refurbishment itself, but to monitor and report upon contractor progress as customer or client. Now, did she have any decision-making power in respect of the refurbishment at any level?
Yes, because she managed the budget. So if there were any decisions that need to be made that had a budgetary impact, and she could contain that within the budget, she could make those decisions.
I see. And what sort of decisions would she not be able to make where she needed your approval?
Anything that had a major impact on the budget or delivery or quality, etc. But she was experienced, and Claire and I sat diagonally opposite, so I was aware of what she was working on, what she was working on.
Right. And Peter Madison, what sort of decisions would neither you nor Claire Williams be able to make on the Grenfell Tower project, which were the preserve of Peter Madison?
Anything that had an impact on the budget.
That's like Claire Williams, though, isn't it?
Yes.
So who would be the decision maker? Claire Williams or Peter Madison or you or all of you?
It would go up through the chain if I was comfortable, but I don't think I needed to make any decisions in Grenfell in terms of once it got onto site. I think we'd established the budget before that, so she would be managing the budget from that point. Claire was less involved in the procurement, but her role became more important once we were starting on site.
Now, let me try it a different way. I'm not sure I put my question as well as it could have been. Can you give us an example of the sort of decision where you and Claire might look at each other and say, well, we can't decide this. This is one for Peter.
No, I think there were a couple of times that we made decisions. I think there's only one to do with changing the windows on Grenfell, but that would have had a cost impact, but because of the impact not making that change would have on the residents, And again, we discussed it with Peter anyway. He was aware of it.
I see. So you say you sat diagonally opposite
Yeah.
Claire Williams. Where did Peter Madison sit in the office?
Just behind us in an office.
But he was in an office, but you were out on the floor.
Yes.
An open plan
Yes.
arrangement. Is that right? I see. Would it follow from that you had lots of discussions with Claire Williams that would not have been in an email or in writing at all?
I would be aware of the issue she's dealing with. I would hear her on the phone, but whether we had discussions, if she's a particular something she wanted to talk to me about, or a query or a problem, we would discuss it, and it wouldn't necessarily be in an email.
I see. And what about Peter Madison? Would there be discussions with Peter Madison? You might pop your head round his office door, or she might, which wouldn't be recorded in writing.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you say in your first statement at paragraph 36, if we could please go to that, it's at page 8. Page 8, paragraph 36, fourth sentence down, you say, neither Claire, I, or any member of our team had any technical expertise in relation to the refurbishment work. Does it follow from that that nobody had any technical expertise, or did you have some technical expertise in relation to the refurbishment work?
We were acting as client, so we were employing people who were advising us technically.
Right.
So it's a professional team, but we were acting as client. We would probably understand if we were they wanted to suggest something to us, what the impact of that might be technically, or we would ask them further questions so that we could understand what it might be.
I mean, given your training and your background in architecture that you very helpfully explained to us earlier on, you did have some technical expertise in relation to the Grenfell Tower refurbishment work, didn't you?
Yes, but my role was as client and to oversee delivery.
Yes. But you had enough technical expertise to know whether something was going wrong or off track, or questions had not been asked where they should have been asked. Is that fair?
I think my role was more monitoring progress, program, any issues that arose, rather than delving into the detail of the construction.
Mr. Gibson, I think what Mr. Millett's suggesting is that you were an educated client.
Yes.
In the sense that you would understand technical aspects.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, can I then turn to look at the role of RBKC? And we'll come back shortly to the question of the expertise of the Grenfell TMO team, if I can use that loose expression. I want to ask you some questions about the relationship between the TMO and RBKC. If you go to your first witness statement at page 3, please, let's look together at paragraph 14. You say there that TMO managed RBKC's housing under the right to manage legislation, and its roles and responsibilities were set out in the modular management agreement with RBKC. The MMA content was in standard form following regulations set by the Secretary of State. Are you familiar with the MMA?
No.
You're not. Were you familiar at the time with the MMA?
No.
Right. Let me just ask one question about it then in light of that answer. Can we go to the document? It's at RBK 3019006. We're going to go in it to page 35, but this is the first page of it, and we can see from the second page of it, although there's no need to turn it up, that it was dated the 12th of June 2006. Can we go to page 35, please? I just want to draw your attention to one clause in it. It's clause 6.1 on page 35, under the heading Major Works. The BWTMO agrees to enter into contracts for agreed major works and supervise such works if the council has included a sufficient amount within the allowances for the BWTMO to carry out such works. During your time at the TMO, indeed, were you aware of that provision?
Not specifically, no.
You weren't. Did you know generally that the TMO could enter into major works and contracts and supervise those works? That it had that freedom?
As long as they had an agreed budget and as long as there might be budget approval needed from Kensington and Chelsea.
I see. Did you think at any time that when the TMO was supervising major works, it was doing so independently of RBKC or as an agent for RBKC in any way?
We were doing it independently, but the ownership of the properties and the asset belonged to RBKC, so we were acting on their behalf.
Yeah. I understand that. In fact, let's just go straight to your first witness statement and go back to that and look at paragraph 17 on page 4. And you say there, the Grenfell refurbishment was by far the largest of one of a number of projects within my remit at TMO. The refurbishment project was an RBKC project which TMO was required to deliver on its behalf. Just to be very clear, Mr. Gibson, when you say that it was an RBKC project, is that simply because it was a building owned by the RBKC?
My understanding was that they had identified the need for works to this building. My understanding also that the TMO up until Grenfell had carried out relatively minor works to properties, and that the major capital works were still, the ownership still sat with RBKC. And I think this was the first project where we were being given the opportunity to carry out this type of work on their behalf.
When you say on their behalf,
Yeah.
I just want to understand what you mean by that. Did you mean essentially that that RBKC gave TMO all instructions, or is it simply limited to the fact that the asset belonged to them and they held the purse strings?
Yes. I think before this, a project of this size might have been delivered by RBKC themselves. I don't think it was part of the original agreement. I think there were some discussions backwards and forwards, but before my time. Yeah. And this was the first big project that the TMO were delivering. So I think some of the responsibilities had transferred.
I see. Just in lay terms, general terms, so that we can all understand it, at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project, who did you think was the client?
The client was the TMO.
The TMO.
Yeah.
Can we then turn to a different topic, which is your role in the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, and start with paragraph 18 of your first witness statement on page 4, if we can. And you say there, just below where we were, the refurbishment had been substantially planned and designed before I joined TMO, but the arrangements at the time I arrived were in suspension. RBKC had engaged a number of their call-off contractors to prepare the refurbishment, and the project was in limbo because the pricing was over budget. The main contractors at that time were Leadbitter, who had been engaged by RBKC to cost their scheme. Leadbitter were part of RBKC's call-off contractors, and they had been engaged by RBKC to conduct a costing exercise involving a pricing mechanism that was not specific to Grenfell Tower and was based on standard pricing arrangements. Now, you say that there. In your fourth witness statement, I think you seek to correct or clarify this paragraph in some respects, but in general terms, is it still correct that when you arrived at the TMO in the February of 2013, you understood that this was an RBKC scheme, Grenfell, using RBKC call-off contractors?
My understanding was that RBKC had identified the works to Grenfell, and that the TMO were able to, once that decision had been made that we were delivering the works and that responsibility transferred to us, that we were able to access their contractors from their OG procurement.
You say that that was your understanding.
Yeah.
Who told you, or what was the source of your understanding that you as the TMO were able to access their contractors from their OJEU procurement?
I would have been briefed by Paul Duncan, but I've had at lower levels with RBKC, and when we're talking about hidden homes, etc., they would often talk about us accessing their procurement.
Did anybody from the RBKC tell you that when it came to the Grenfell Tower project, you could access their contractors that they had acquired under the tender for Calc?
Did anyone from RBKC tell?
Yes.
No.
Right. Did anybody else within the TMO tell you that?
That was the arrangement that was in place, and the background on the board papers, etc., indicated that.
Yes, there's certainly, Mr. Gibson, I'm not suggesting that you were involved in the arrangements, but those were the arrangements you came to, I think,
Yes.
when you arrived.
Yeah.
Did you ask anyone at the time when you arrived, how come we can access contractors who had been procured by the RBKC as opposed to the TMO for the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't think it would have been unusual. The asset was RBKC's. It would depend on the wording of the OG notice.
Is it something you investigated?
No.
You didn't. You just took it as read.
Yes.
I see. Now, can we look at paragraph 19? You say there, upon the project being handed over and upon the arrival of Peter Madison in 2013, Peter and I assisted Artelia, the appointed consultant project managers, you say with capital letters there, to provide a more focused pricing for the refurbishments and looking at the design with regard to the relocation of office space and ancillary buildings, and following that the scheme was put out to tender through the OJEU tender processes. Yeah. Now I'm going to come back later to the role of Artelia, but when you arrived at the TMO, who had retained Leadbitter in relation to the Grenfell Tower project? Or had there been a retainer of Leadbitter yet in relation to the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't think there had been.
Right. Was there an intention at that time to stop using Leadbitter, who had been the RBKC call-off contractor for the Calc project, when you arrived?
Sorry, just clarify the question.
Yeah, let me try again. At the time you arrived, February 2013, did you detect or were you told that there was an intention to stop using the RBKC call-off contractor, Leadbitter?
No.
You weren't? No. Right. When you arrived, and I know Peter Madison had only arrived shortly before you, did you know what his intention was about the potential for a re-procurement exercise?
I think Peter and I were in the same position. I think we met with Artelia and Simon Cash to understand the position and get the background on where we were with the project.
Right. Yeah, okay, well, let's come to... let's go to that then, and I'll take a question out of order. If you go to paragraph 25 of this statement, can we just take that? It's at page 6. I just want to pick up that last answer. You say there, at paragraph 25 at the top of the page, at the time of my appointment, the rebuilding of the Kensington Area Leisure Centre, Calc, was being undertaken directly by RBKC using their contractors, Leadbitter, Architects, Studio E and other contractors. Yeah. RBKC chose to use the same contractors and consultants for the proposed Grenfell Tower refurbishment, which they were able to do under their framework agreement via the public sector procurement arrangements to call off contractors without the need to go out to tender. Now, again, just leaving aside what you've said by way of correction in your fourth witness statement, as far as you understood it at the time, is it right that RBKC had chosen to use those contractors for Grenfell and not the TMO?
I don't know if I know who had chosen to use. Let me try it another way. The understanding seemed to be that the OG notice for Calc and what was within it had allowed us to use the same, because the sites were adjacent to each other, and we could access via the OG arrangements. I think my understanding at the time was, if we wanted to go down that procurement route, then Leadbetters were the contractor that we needed to be talking to.
Right. My question was slightly different.
Yeah.
My question was, as far as you understood it, at the time, did you think that RBKC had itself made the choice to use the same contractors for Grenfell as they had for Calc?
No.
As opposed to the TMO making that choice?
I don't think I was aware either way.
Right. Did it concern you at the time that the same set of contractors had been or were to be appointed for Grenfell as had been appointed for Calc, simply because they were working on Calc already?
Not as such. It concerned me more, were Leadbetters the right contractor for Grenfell Tower?
That's a different question.
Yeah.
But I think I have your answer, not as such. Can I go back then to your reference in paragraph 19 of your statement, the previous page, to Artelia acting as project managers? I just want to pick that point up here. You say there that they're project managers. Was your role limited to assisting Artelia with more focused pricing when you arrived in the February of 2013?
No.
No. You agree, I think, that the project was a complex one at that point, don't you?
Yes.
Yes. But you also had other projects within your portfolio as someone running the capital investment team.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
You had a portfolio of which Grenfell Tower was only one when you arrived.
Yes.
Yeah. How much? Can you give us a feel for how much time at that stage, at least, Grenfell Tower took up in comparison with the other projects in your portfolio?
At that time, I was still going through an induction process, so I was getting to know the TMO and how it worked, and was meeting lots of people. But in terms of time, perhaps 10%?
10%.
Possibly less.
Right. What was the maximum amount of time in percentage terms that Grenfell Tower took up between February 2013 and June 2016 when you left?
It would have reduced, but probably 10% at any time was the maximum.
Okay. Now, can we go back, and I'm sorry to jump around in your statement, back to paragraph 36 on page 8, please.
Yeah.
This is your first witness statement. You say there, paragraph 36, that it's just a third of the way down. The project team of consultants were the experts specifically engaged to design and develop the refurbishment work to meet the project requirements. None of us at TMO had any relevant expertise for these works, and none of us had involvement or understanding of the cladding work to be used and included as part of the refurbishment. Mm-hmm. You see that?
Yes.
We had no knowledge or experience of cladding materials or fitment. This is specialist work, and we had no knowledge of the materials involved or how they needed to be installed. The requirement was that all works would be compliant with all legislation, regulation, standards and guidance, and we relied on the contractors and consultants to achieve this, and for the clerk of works, planners and building control to check this. Now, you say that the project team were engaged to design and develop the refurbishment work, mm-hmm. but they weren't able to make decisions about it, were they? That was for you.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
The project team of consultants were there to design and develop the refurbishment work, but the ultimate decisions about that fell to the TMO, no?
Yes. If I could give some context, possibly. At this time, we stopped the scheme and we looked at it again. So in terms of Peter and I worked with the designers to redefine the scope of the project. The project had drifted. There were works being carried out that were not to Grenfell that were contained within the pricing mechanism at that time. So we looked at what was in the scope, and we reset a new client's brief.
Right. I'm going to come back to that later on. I just want a slightly more precise answer to a narrower question. Let me try it a different way. You say you relied on the project team of consultants and entirely. I'm sorry, the project team of consultants and contractors.
Yeah.
For, let's see if we can identify them. Expertise in relation to the works,
Yes.
understanding of cladding,
Yes.
knowledge of the materials,
Yes.
installation of materials,
Yes.
and compliance with all legislation, regulation, guidance, and standards.
Yes.
Yes. Given that you were relying on them, was it not critical for you to make sure that each of those members of the project team of consultants and contractors were competent?
They had gone through the process. I understood they'd gone through the process. The project was well developed at this stage. In meetings with them, they came over, all the project team, designers and others involved, came over as having a good understanding of the project, what they needed to do, came over competently as consultants and advisors. So I didn't have any reason. They seemed to understand the project. They projected to us a good understanding of the project. So there's nothing in my meetings with them that would have given me any concern about their ability to do the tasks that they were doing.
No, I understand that, and thank you for that. But that wasn't quite my question. Again, let me just try it differently. Do you accept as a proposition that it was critical for the TMO as the client to make sure that whichever consultants and contractors were used for Grenfell, they were competent in all the areas I've just put to you?
Yes.
Yes. And experienced?
Yes.
And had the relevant knowledge of materials and how to install them?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you said that you weren't involved in that process, and indeed in your fourth witness statement at paragraph 5, and I don't need to take you to it, you made a clarification that when those consultants first became involved in the project, you had little knowledge of how they came to be appointed. Perhaps I just ought to show you what you then say. If you go to TMO 00879-742 at page 2, please, you then say at paragraph 5, if we can just see that, you say, my understanding, this is middle of the paragraph, my understanding of how the consultants were appointed as at the time I joined the TMO was that they had been procured via a framework that RBKC had access to and used for the adjacent calc scheme, and that the TMO had been able to take advantage of this procurement for the consultants on Grenfell Tower. So, given that evidence, did you at any point question whether the use of the calc consultants was suitable when it came to Grenfell?
No.
No. You never thought to yourself, well, I know that Studio E have been appointed to the calc, but are they really suitable architects to be used on Grenfell Tower?
The scheme was very well developed. I had looked at their stage CD report. It seemed very professional. I'd met Bruce Sinas. He came over very well and very competent.
Right.
I had no reason to think they didn't have the ability to do this.
Did he or anybody else ever tell you that he had never done an overcladding of a high-rise residential block? Had he done so, would you have had cause to question whether or not Studio E was a suitable appointment for Grenfell?
Not necessarily.
Why is that?
I think there's a point in anyone's career where they're doing something for the first time. There shouldn't be anything technically very difficult about overcladding a building. The complexity comes in with high rise and access and other areas, but cladding is something that is very common in the industry.
When people do things, in your experience, for the first time in their careers, is it your experience that they normally do something under the close supervision of somebody who has done that thing before?
I think it would depend on how confident they are in that. In terms of designing the cladding, I don't think it would be particularly onerous.
You don't think it would be particularly onerous? You don't now, or you didn't then?
I didn't then.
What do you think now?
Obviously mistakes were made, but it wouldn't be the level of detail I would normally query, because we had all the arrangements in place that we thought would protect us. We were the client. It wasn't the sort of area I would be looking at.
I mean, as the client,
Yeah.
If you had discovered that, and I know this is a counterfactual, but if you discovered that that Bruce Staines had never done an overcladding of a high-rise project before, would you not have wanted to ensure that if he was going to work on the Grenfell Tower project, he worked under the supervision of somebody who had done such a project?
I don't think so.
You don't? Okay. Can we then turn to the role of Artelia? First of all, project manager. And again, just bearing in mind the words I showed you in your statement before. Paragraph 19, I've showed you that. Can I go, or stay actually, within your fourth witness statement, paragraph 6, please. You say, at paragraph 19 of that statement, I refer to Artelia as the appointed consultant project managers, when you put capital P and a capital M there, as this was how I recall the Artelia employees introducing themselves to me. At paragraph 37, I also refer to Artelia as the contract administrator, cost consultant and coordinator. I have since received a letter I sent to Artelia on the 6th of March 2014 in which I confirm the appointment of Artelia as employer's agent, CDN coordinator and quantity surveyor, and I can confirm that these were the formal roles undertaken by Artelia in respect of the project. Now, first, is it your evidence that when you arrived at the TMO in 2013, Artelia employees introduced themselves to you as project managers?
Yes.
Right. Do you remember which employees of Artelia did that?
There were a number, but I'm clear in terms of Alan Dawson or Robert Powell. There was a project in itself to look at where we were with Grenfell and plan a way forward, and they were project managing that activity.
I see. So do I take it from that you thought Artelia were undertaking the Grenfell Tower project as project managers in the formal sense?
They were undertaking that piece of work in the formal sense. They were undertaking their actual contract with us for the construction was, as my last statement, that was their roles.
I'm not sure I really understand that answer, I'm afraid. From the introductions that you had when you first arrived, did you think that Alan Dawson or Robert Powell were the project managers in the formal sense for Grenfell Tower?
I think I did.
You did. Now, if you go, please, to your first witness statement and go to page 12, I'd like to look with you at paragraph 63. You say there, Artelia were initially engaged by RBKC to manage the CALC project, and it was considered sensible and expeditious for them to continue with the Grenfell Tower refurbishment on behalf of the TMO. They had an established track record of robust contract management on the adjacent CALC scheme. where there had been difficult contractual issues to manage. Their role was that of contract administrator, cost consultant, QS, and CDM coordinator, and as such they were required to manage the contract on behalf of TMO, advise on the specifications in terms of CDM, and understand the costs involved, and provide regular reporting on programme and costs. Now, when you say there, manage the contract on behalf of the TMO, what did you mean?
Within their employer's agent role, they have a duty to administer the contract. General duty. We're the client, there's a contractor, and their duty is to administer the contract.
I thought.
Yeah.
I see. So you're referring to the EA role, the employer's agent role. I see. And when you say advise on the specification in terms of CDM, can you just be clearer what you mean by that expression?
I would expect the CDMC to look at the contractor's design and to let us know that it was acceptable and it met the requirements of legislation, etc. It fulfilled the terms of the contract.
Right. So did you think that the CDMC role was essentially to double-check compliance of design with regulatory standards? Is that what you're saying?
I think there is a role for CDMC there. That would have been my understanding.
Was that your understanding of the
Yes.
2007 regulations?
I think they had my thoughts were that they had a duty.
Right. Now, at paragraph 64 of this statement, just at the bottom of the page, we can pick this theme up a little bit more closely. You say, as the CDM coordinator, they were required to check the information and comment on any concerns before going to tender and throughout the refurbishment project as well, and if we turn the page, as well as coordinate contractors during the project. Their contract administration roles was to alert the TMO as project client of any cost or programme issues that would impact positively or negatively on the project. When you say check the information and comment on any concerns, what did you mean by that? Let me be more specific. When you say, and this is the bottom of page 12, I think, pick that up. You say check the information and comment on any concerns before going to tender. Right, you use that expression. Can you be a bit more precise about what you mean?
The CDMC would provide a document within the tender documents that gives information on the design requirements within the CDM regulations. And then further down the line, the contractor's proposals will be examined against that.
Right. When you say coordinate the contractors during the project, as you do over the page, was that, what aspect of their role was to coordinate contractors? Was that QS, EA, or CDMC?
It's possibly badly worded in terms of coordinating contractors.
Well, how would you like to word it now?
There's one contractor, one point of responsibility. I would expect the CDMC to say that it's fit for purpose, and the employer's and the employer's agent role for them to say and confirm that it fulfills their contractual obligations.
Now, going back to what you said before about the role of the CDMC checking the design, if Artelia had contractually excluded responsibility for the design, that couldn't mean that in their role as CDMC they were responsible for the design. That's a proposition I'm putting to you. Do you accept that?
Can you repeat?
Yes. Well, let me try it a different way. Did you understand that in taking on the role of CDM coordinator, Artelia were responsible for checking the design for correctness, or in some other way taking responsibility for the design?
No, there was only one point of responsibility for the design, and that was the contractor. But I would expect them to say that they're satisfied that the contractor has taken into account the requirements of the CDA
Very well.
regulations.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, this may be an appropriate point for a break.
Yes. Very well. Well, if that suits you, it probably is a good time. Mr. Gibson, we have a break, as you probably know, during the morning and the afternoon, and this is a good time to take it. So we'll stop now. We'll come back, continue your evidence at 25 to 12, please. And while you're out of the room, I have to ask you not to talk about your evidence or anything to do with it to anyone else.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you
very much. Would you go with the usher, please? All right, 25 to 12, please. Okay. Yes, would you ask Mr. Gibson to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Gibson, ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Thank you very much. Can I turn to a different topic, which is the client design advisor, and start by asking you to go to ART 408591. Now, this is an email from Phil Booth to Simon Cash internally at Artelia, dated the 10th of January 2014. I know that it says 1/10/14, but very often with Artelia dates, we have the American dating. It's the 10th of January 2014. And it says, Simon, Claire wishes for us to put forward a proposal for the CDA role. As the custodian of fee proposals and scopes, please can I ask you to do this? I know they are considering others, for example, one-man bands, but they have PI concerns. Kind regards, Philip. Now, Claire is Claire Williams.
Yes.
Did you yourself have any involvement in seeking a proposal from Artelia for a CDA, a client design advisor?
No, but if I can take you back a little bit to where this arose in the first place?
Yes, just to bear in mind, this is January 14.
Yes. When we were managing the project plan, when we were redefining the project scope,
Yes.
and going through that plan, there were a series of meetings that we attended, and I think it was on the risk register, and we went over the same points over and over again. Artelia were advising us how they would best protect our interest once we got into contract with a contractor that we might not be familiar with. And those discussions and their recommendations were innovation of the designers, Studio E and curtains, and the retention of Max Fordham as our M&E to provide a client design advisor role to us, because that's where we thought the complexities were. At that time, they said they could also offer us a CDA role that some clients choose to have. Wasn't one that I was ever been offered before or contractually aware of. And I could see the benefits for some clients if it's the first time if it's a one-off building and you aren't used to being a client on taking on quite a major property, the CDA role might be quite useful. But I believe we had our designers on board, they were working with the contractor, and you wouldn't normally bring in another designer to check the designer's work.
Well, you say you wouldn't bring in another designer. We'll come to the proposal in a moment, because that's not what the CDA role that they came to propose involved. But can I go back to my question?
Yep.
Which is, and I'm not sure I now. Well, the question was, did you yourself have any involvement in seeking a proposal from Artelia? Now, let me put the question a different way. The email I'm showing you says, Claire wishes for us to put forward a proposal for the CDA role. My question is, was there a perception within the TMO that it was necessary to have a CDA, a client design advisor?
No.
Why was Claire Williams asking for a proposal for a CDA then?
I don't know. I can only assume. I don't know.
Did you have any role yourself in Claire asking Artelia for that proposal?
No.
Do you know why she asked for such a proposal?
No. If she was going to ask for a proposal, I would have expected her to have discussed it with me and explained the reasons why she thought it was necessary. We didn't have that conversation.
I see. When did you first discover, we may be able to work this out from the documents, but when did you first discover that she had, off her own bat, so it appears, asked them, Artelia, for a proposal for a CDA role?
I didn't.
You didn't?
I didn't know anything about her asking for a proposal.
Right. Well, let's see if we can put the proposal before you and see if it triggers a recollection. Can we go to ART 406744, please? These are the minutes of a progress meeting, number 1 on the 15th of July 2014. And on the first page, we can see that among others from the TMO, you were present, Mr. Gibson. Yes? Second line down, present, David Gibson. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And if we go to the bottom of page 2, we can see item 3, design development. You see that there? Just at the very bottom of the page. And if we go over to page 3, we can see it says CW to appoint a client design advisor. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yes. And the action there, CW. So it looks from this, Mr. Gibson, that you were in a meeting where this was taken as an action by Claire Williams. So given that you were there, can you explain how you never did know about her asking for a proposal for a client design advisor?
I don't. I know, as I stated previously, that the role had been not recommended by Artelia, but a suggestion that we could have. I can only suggest that this has been minuted incorrectly. Possibly if she was to consider appointing a client design advisor, but it was never a discussion that we had.
Right. Do you recall nothing at all about being at a meeting such as this in mid-2014 where the appointment by the TMO of a client design advisor was discussed?
I was at the meeting. I don't recall Claire asking for it, and I would be surprised.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at the proposal itself and see if you can. Well, actually, before I go to that document, let me just ask you: were you routinely provided with minutes from progress meetings such as this?
Yes.
You were?
Yes.
So can we take it that you would have received this minute?
Yes.
Would you have read it?
I would have scanned it and checked for actions.
So you would have, in scanning it and checking for actions, seen that Claire Williams was to appoint a client design advisor? Because that's what's written down on the page.
I haven't picked that up, and I don't understand why it's there.
Right. So does that tell us that whatever else you might have done with these programme minutes, you didn't read this one very carefully?
I think I scanned them because I would have attended the meeting before. Yeah.
Well, let's go to the proposal. It's ART 406279, please. And this is a proposal from Artelia from February 2014 for a client design advisor. Just looking at its first page there, is this a document you think you've ever seen before?
I have seen the document.
Do you think you saw it at the time, February 2014?
It's possible, but I can't confirm definitely yes or not. I know we received it January 14 via Jenny Jackson. Jenny was doing the appointments. I can't recall whether we had a discussion or not over it. If Jenny had thought we had needed the role, she would have had a discussion with me.
Right. Did you say it's possible that you saw it in February 2014?
If Jenny wanted clarification on whether we wanted the role, she would have spoken to me. Right. I don't recall a discussion.
Yeah, now, Mr. Gibson, you mentioned Jenny. Do you mean Jenny or do you mean Claire?
I mean,
Jenny.
our procurement consultant, Jenny Jackson.
That's Jenny Jackson.
Yes.
Yes, I thought you might have done. I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
what you say, I know we received it in January 2014
Yeah,
via Jenny Jackson.
yes.
But why do you say you know that, given that this is dated February 2014?
Sorry, my mistake.
Oh, I see.
February 14.
So,
yeah.
Just being
Sorry, early
a
14.
little bit more,
Yeah.
a little bit more focused.
Yeah.
Do you recall seeing this document in or around February 2014?
No.
You do. Do you remember seeing this document at any time before the middle of 2014?
I think I must have discussed it with Claire because I recognise her response on taking up this appointment. She had discussed it with me, so at whatever time she wrote that email, we would have had discussion and I would have looked at this document.
So just trying to understand your evidence. Do I take it from this, from what you've told us so far, that you never discovered that she had asked for this proposal, but you saw the proposal and then discussed it with her nonetheless?
Yes, it was her asking for the proposal is the bit that I queried.
I follow. Did you, when you did eventually get to see this proposal, study it in any detail?
Yes, I would have studied in some detail.
Some detail. Well, let's see how we go. Page 18, please. Did you see that contained within it here was a CV of an architect called Richmal Harding?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. This is the person whom Artelia were proposing to act as the client design advisor. Do you think you read this CV?
I possibly scanned it, but my view is that we didn't need the CDA role.
No, I'm just keep with the document. I just want to know how much of it you took on board when you did get it. Did you pick up the fact that what was being proposed by way of a CDA was a qualified architect with 15 years of experience?
I think I did.
You think you did? Okay. Going to page 3 then, if we can go back to that. And let's look at the third bullet point on that page. In the box, this is what you would be getting within the scope of services from Richmal Harding as a CDA if you appointed her. Looking at the third bullet point, it says, review through a design compliance report, agreed key decision packages following the production of detailed drawings, stage F, reporting to TMO using our risk-based warning light methodology backed up by our firm opinions and recommendations. Did you pick up from your review of this document when you did review it what a design compliance report would entail as described there?
I would understand it, yes.
Yeah. So do you agree that a design compliance report would have been helpful to the TMO to ensure that the design at every stage was compliant with the building regulations and British standards?
Yes, but it's additional to the contract requirements. So yes, it's an additional check.
Yeah. And at the end of scheme design, just above the header construction phase, it says, we will provide design advice as required by the TMO.
So I'm not seeing that.
Okay, well, let's go to page let's stay on that page and look at the middle paragraph. This probably does the point just as well. Page 3. In the middle paragraph there, it says, Richmal has an in-depth understanding of building life cycle costings and understanding of how the public sector is as focused on revenue costs as much as those of capital costs. She has experience of value engineering at both pre- and post-contract tender stage and the ability to focus on the brief and variations to it and weigh up and clearly present options and risks for you. Did you spot that when you saw this?
It's possible, I can't recollect.
And do you agree that having design advice such as this from a qualified architect with this degree of experience would have been extremely helpful to the TMO to ensuring that design standards didn't slip?
It's not something I've ever previously been recommended to have. I believe we had the suite of contractual documents that were required. We had the designers on board. So I didn't give it a great deal of consideration.
You didn't give it a great...
In terms of some of it, I thought was doing a check that the clerk of works were already doing on site, etc. But I wouldn't have thought we didn't at this stage need design advice, because we're coming, middle of 14 now? We're on site, we're well on site.
Well, it's not, it's February 2014.
Sorry, February 2014.
Yeah, well, you weren't on site at that stage.
Okay.
In fact, Mr. Gibson, just to assist you with your recollection, February 2014 was towards the end of the tender process.
Yes.
And which then came to its culmination in the March of that year.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you to go to page 4 and look at overview under project understanding and key data? In the second paragraph, it says this: with the novation of architects Studio E to the contractor, the relationship and direct access to architects and other members of the design team that you've enjoyed on this project to date will change. Yep. The services of a client design advisor will ensure that the initial design that you have agreed and promoted to stakeholders does not get watered down, quotes unquotes, as part of the procurement and delivery process. Now, given what's said there, did you not think it useful at the time, given the possibility or likelihood that Studio E would be novated to sit under Ryden as Ryden's sub-consultant, to have the valuable services of a client design advisor as somebody you could talk to directly about design?
No, I think if Studio E had felt their designs were being compromised, they would have found a way to have a conversation with us.
But that would be leaving it to them rather
Yes.
than having a resource you could immediately pick up the phone to.
Yes, but I don't think there was any stage where I felt the need to pick up a phone in terms of getting design advice. The design decisions we were taking at that stage, post-tender, were relatively minor.
Looking a little bit down the page, we can see that she, or Artelia rather, records their understanding that the scope of works was out to tender and will cover the following renovations. And then you look at the third bullet point and you see overcladding external elevations to improve appearance. I'll leave aside the question about appearance. You've told us already that Studio E did not necessarily have the in-house expertise in relation to overcladding external elevations. Did it not occur to you that it would, at least in respect of that aspect of the project, have been extremely useful to the TMO to have immediate direct access to an expert architect to advise directly on that question?
Sorry, I think I must misinterpret you, because I don't think I had an understanding that Studio E did not have experience in overcladding. I think when we were previously discussing, and perhaps I picked it up wrong, was did I know whether they had previous experience of overcladding?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let me try it a different way. What gave you to think that Studio E did have experience in overcladding a high-rise building?
There was nothing to indicate to me that they weren't experienced.
Right, well, that's
Yeah.
a negative.
Yeah.
So there's a vacuum there in your understanding. Would it not have been helpful to fill that vacuum with a CDA who could have advised you on overcladding external elevations?
I don't think I would have given it consideration at that time.
Right. Now, going to page 11 of the proposal, if we can. Oh, well, no, let's go to page 6 before I go to the end. Did you see, when you looked at this document, the services scope, and in particular what is said there under scheme design, And then in the third sentence or third paragraph of that, we will provide design advice as required by KCTMO.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that? Did you pick that up?
Yes.
You did. And again, did you not think it would be useful for the TMO to have design advice from a qualified architect of 15 years standing, given that Studio E were going to be novated to the
Yes, but
contract?
given that we had got to the point of tender, we understood the tender documents. The design proposals had been reasonably well developed. So in terms of design advice going forward, after Studio E had been novated, or I don't think they were novated in the end, but we're working with the contractor, we weren't expecting to have or need design advice.
You say you don't think they were novated in the end.
Yeah.
Is it your evidence that you thought at the time that Studio E was still contracted directly to the TMO?
No.
So what do you mean by?
There was a proposal within the documents, within the tender documents, to novate Studio E to the contractor. I think discussions were had, because I remember speaking to Peter Madison, who wasn't keen on novation. And the discussions were that Ryden should satisfy themselves and agree terms of agreement, terms of appointment between each other, but he wasn't keen that there was an official novation, and I don't think we have a novation contract in place. So there was an intention, there was a possibility of novation, but I don't think it happened.
You say you don't think it happened.
Yeah.
So what was your understanding about whether or not Studio E, after Ryden had been appointed, still continued in a direct relationship with?
No, they had a direct relationship with Ryden, but there wasn't a novation. They agreed terms.
And having done that, what was your understanding of the continued relationship, if any, directly between the TMO and Studio E?
After that, there was no continued direct relationship apart from design warranties, etc. The relationship was via Ryden.
Yeah, and my point is that given that at least it was a possibility, as at February 2014 and thereafter, that Studio E would be subcontracted to Ryden, if I can use a neutral word without
Yep.
saying the word novation,
Yep.
that it would have been extremely useful for the TMO to continue to have design advice from a qualified architect directly down to the end of the project.
The design was well developed, so I'm trying to think back on circumstances where we needed design advice. So did I identify a need for design advice for ourselves? No. And do I remember us needing the design advice? I don't recall that we did.
Why was Peter Madison not keen on, as we use the word novation, but not keen on novation?
I think novation, means there's an obligation for the contractor to work with that architect and use them to develop the designs as necessary to make it fit for construction. I think we were quite happy with Studio E's performance. We didn't see that there needed to be an novation, but they would agree terms between themselves, but not a novation.
So cutting through this,
Yes.
was it your understanding that Peter Madison wanted the TMO to continue to have a direct architect-client relationship with Studio E, even once the Ryden contract was let?
No.
No?
No.
Right.
Our relationship had finished at that point. The contractor had taken on all design responsibilities, and we were leaving it for the contractor to decide how to use Studio E, but we knew Studio E were involved in the development of the design.
So when you say Peter Madison wasn't keen on novation, I think you mean it in the strict, narrow legal sense of the
Yes.
word. Right, I follow.
Yes.
Can we go to page 11 of the proposal? Here we see the fees that Artelia were going to charge, and it comes to £30,922.50p for the CDA roll and £600 for the POE. So a total of 31,000 odd, £31,500 odd. Did you have any views at the time when you saw this document about whether that cost was worth paying in order to have the benefit of this professional advice?
I didn't see the need for the role.
Can we go to ART 402752, please?
Well, Mr. Gibson, do you, in a sense, are you saying you wouldn't have accepted this even if it had been offered free?
Free, possibly, but
But I mean, I'm not getting the impression.
I didn't feel there was a need for the role. I wasn't particularly interested in the role.
Yeah.
It was an additional service that Artelia had told us that some clients choose to have. There was no recommendation that we should have it.
But I asked the question because I'm not currently getting the impression from your answers that you looked at the price and said to yourself, well, it would be useful, but not at that price.
I didn't.
I'm getting the impression you didn't think it was useful at all.
I didn't think there was a need for it.
Right.
At any price?
I don't think price was a consideration.
Okay. Well, let's just to see how we go with this. It may be that I can take the next run of questions more quickly in light of that answer, an exchange with the chairman just now. Can we go to ART 402752, please? These are the minutes of progress meeting number 2 on the 19th of August 2014, and we can see that you're there as well as Claire Williams. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. And again, can we take it that you would have seen these minutes after the meeting and at least scanned them?
Yes.
Right. Can we look at page 2, please, under item 3? The heading here is design development. And we can see there it says, again, CW to appoint a client design advisor. Action CW. Mm-hmm. Post-meeting note, you see, CW advised that the TMO will perform the role of CDA in-house. Mm-hmm. They will therefore need to sign off all decision. Mm-hmm. All design.
Yeah.
Now, up to this point, this is August 2014, was it expected that the TMO would appoint a client design advisor? We saw the meeting notes from the previous month, July 14. Here we see them again, August 14, with the action, but then a post-meeting note.
The expectation was the areas of design that we would be commenting on signing off, were in relation to the layouts of the new build units, the boxing club and the nursery.
Right, let me try this a different way. It looks, in chronological terms, it looks as if you have a proposal in February, which has been invited in the January 14. There's an action in July 2014 that Claire Williams would appoint a client design advisor. That action is repeated in the August progress meeting note, but then there's a post-meeting note where CW advised that the TMO would perform the role of CDA in-house. Mm-hmm. My question, I put it differently, was the decision that Claire Williams wouldn't appoint a client design advisor, but the TMO would do that in-house, taken after the 19th of August meeting, and then recorded in this minute as such?
I can't. We had a discussion, myself and Claire. We thought, as I've stated, that the areas of design we would be asking to comment on were in relation to the new build units, boxing club and nursery.
I follow.
Yeah.
But the decision not to appoint a CDA was made shortly after this meeting. Is that right? Looking at
There was no need to appoint a CDA.
You told us that.
Yes.
I just want to know when the decision was made, Mr. Can you help me with that?
I can't help but if we use the
Right.
post-meeting note that we must have at that time looked at CW to appoint a plant design advisor, discussed it, and in terms of responsibility and the areas of design we were discussing, that we didn't need any assistance.
Right. Now, we know that the proposal was made in February 14. This is August 14.
Yeah.
Was there a reason why the decision hadn't been made or the issue hadn't been resolved between those dates?
Between February and August?
Yes.
I don't recall if I got the plant design advisor proposition formally before this date. I know it was appended, I know now it was appended to the appointments Jenny Jackson was doing in February 14. And I think, as I stated previously, Jenny identified any gaps in our coverage contractually. So she would have reviewed that. If she thought there was a need, she would have spoken to me.
Right.
I don't recall us having that conversation.
I follow. So you can't explain why it took so long for the TMO to decide not to have a CDA?
I assume that Artelia were pushing for us to take on this role, and we didn't feel there was a need for it.
Yes, I know, but
Yeah.
you can't. I just want to understand. Do you have any explanation as to why it took between the February and the August of 2014 for the TMO to decide not to appoint a CDA?
No.
Thank you. Now, looking at the post-meeting note, it says that the TMO will need to sign off all design. First of all, who was it within the TMO that you thought would be signing off all design?
Between myself and Claire, we were comfortable that we could cover the areas of design that we were anticipating to need to sign off.
And you've said, I think, just a moment ago, that included the nursery and the boxing club and is this right, the lower four floors?
Yes.
Right. So just on those aspects of the refurbishment, when you say you would be signing them off, does that mean giving final approval to them?
I wouldn't necessarily say I would use the terminology sign off. I would make comment on the design proposals, or at this stage it was the contractor's proposals to us. And I did make comment on, as I recollect, the new units on the lower floors, but we wouldn't sign off the design. That was still the contractor's responsibility.
So can you explain what you understood by the word sign off in the post-meeting note there?
To agree that they're acceptable, or we would have no adverse comments.
Right.
There wasn't a formal signing off process. We would comment on the design proposals. If we had adverse comments, we would pick that up with the contractor. We did make comments. They weren't necessarily. There were comments to do with layouts or kitchens or bathrooms. I can't remember now, but I remember making comments.
So when it says design, does that mean general design or architectural intent, or does it mean the construction drawings for each and every?
No, not the construction drawings.
Not the construction.
This was the sign-off that we were talking about here was the layouts of the new units on the lower floors that hadn't been fully developed at the time we went to tender.
I follow. Now, you've talked about the lower four floors, the nursery and the boxing.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you, the TMO, were not going to sign off on all design in respect of the overcladding?
We wouldn't have expected to. The design on the overcladding, as designed by Studio E, the contractual responsibility was for the contractor to take on that design and develop it and to ensure that it was compliant. So we wouldn't be taking a role in signing off.
I follow. So when it says the TMO will perform the role of CDA in-house and therefore need to sign off all design, I think on what you've told us, that when it came to the cladding, the TMO wouldn't be performing the role of CDA in-house and wouldn't be signing off on that design.
Correct. There was no contractual requirement for us signing off design. The only contractual requirement was for the contractor to develop the designs and construct.
So when it
There's
came
no
to the,
sign-off process required.
so when it came to the cladding,
Yes.
the TMO was entirely reliant for design on who? You tell me.
Initially Studio E, and then the contractor takes responsibility for the development of that design and construction. So the responsibility then sits with it's the point of this suite of documents. There's one point of responsibility, the contractor's taking on that responsibility.
And as an educated client, how would the TMO protect itself against any errors or defects in the designs as developed either by Studio E or the subcontractors? Contractors or subcontractors? Sorry.
Right. We protect ourselves. There would be design warranties as necessary, but the point of responsibility still remains with the contractor.
I see. So I think the answer is right.
Yes.
Can we go to ART 402701? This is an email from Claire Williams to Philip Booth and Peter Blythe on the 29th of August 2014. Now, this is 10 days after progress meeting number 2 we've just seen, for which we've just seen the minutes. Mm-hmm. Dear both, last Tuesday we talked about the appointment of a design advisor and the likelihood that this did not particularly apply to cladding and the M&E elements which were designed and under guarantee. Mm-hmm. You see that?
Yep.
And then she says, upon discussion, most of the design concerns were over the new build areas, i.e. the flats, nursery and boxing club.
Yep.
That's what you've told us. Do you remember whether you saw this email at the time, do you think?
I probably did. I recall the discussion with Claire,
right.
And I recall the discussion about we were comfortable signing off, and I think it was helpful that Claire put in place our understanding of what we would be doing, in that we were signing off the new build areas, flats, nurseries and boxing club. I don't think anyone challenged that.
I see. So do we take it from this that whatever else the CDA might have done, their role would always have been limited to the flats, nursery and boxing club and not the cladding?
No, I think the CDA role was a wider role than that as offered, but contractually we were happy with our point of responsibility, which was riding.
Claire Williams then continues in her email, I've spoken with David Gibson and we are going to see if we can manage this within the TMO as we are very familiar with the specifications for social housing. Mm-hmm. Do you remember having a conversation like that with Claire Williams?
Yes.
You did. And do you know what social housing specifications Claire Williams was referring to there?
Social housing in terms of flats, how they're laid out, and how this is mostly to do with layouts, kitchens and bathrooms, relatively simple M&E going into the flats, etc. It might also refer to disabled access, that type of arrangement.
Was there any link between the exclusion of the cladding from the role of a design advisor, if taken on at all, and what she refers to as the specifications for social housing? Was there any link between the two?
No, there was no. The CDA, we didn't think there was a requirement for the CDA role. So we've set that aside. We have our contractual responsibilities in terms of, is the design and layout, are they acceptable to us as a social landlord? We had a good understanding of what was acceptable or not, because many times I'd made comments before on layouts, but I wouldn't be making comments on construction details.
Right. So I think what you're telling me, and we can take this up with Claire Williams, I suppose, is that the familiarity of the TMO with specifications for social housing was the reason to manage the whole thing in-house, as opposed to specifically to the cladding aspect of the project.
I'm confused about what you mean by managing the
reason
whole
it's
thing
confusing,
internally.
Mr. Gibson, is because the email itself draws the distinction between the cladding and M&E elements on the one hand, and the new build and design concerns over the new build areas, flats, nursery, and boxing.
Yes.
Right. And then she goes on to say that it's going to be managed in-house because the TMO is familiar with the specifications for social housing. And I just want to get a feel for whether there was any link between not having a CDA in respect of the cladding and the fact that the TMO felt that they could manage CDA in-house because of familiarity with social housing. Were they related at all?
I keep trying to, perhaps I'm expressing myself wrong. We didn't feel there was a need for a CDA role. As clients, we had a responsibility to check that we were happy with the design layouts of the new build units. Otherwise, contractually, the CDA role doesn't sit anywhere. We've chosen this type of contract so that there's one point of responsibility. So I'm not expressing myself well.
Don't worry, I think we probably got enough on that. Do you remember Philip Booth giving his evidence to the inquiry on this issue a few days ago? If you want, I can show you what he said about this. But the gist of his evidence at day 49, pages 179.22 to 180.24, is that the TMO didn't want to incur the fees for a CDA.
No, we didn't think there was a need for the rule.
Right, I see. He in answer to the question from Miss Grange, he was asked, did they expressly say to you, we don't want to incur the additional fees? And his answer was, well, yes, they were very much about, do we need this role? You know, it's 30 grand or whatever it was. The impression given by Mr. Booth's evidence was that the price played a significant, or at least a role, in your deciding not to have a CDA. Is that right?
No.
So it was
I didn't think there was a requirement for the role. We were comfortable with what we were expecting to sign off in terms of design proposals, and that wasn't signing off the cladding. We wouldn't be doing that.
Can we then turn to a different topic, which is the introduction of alternative material for cladding and value engineering?
Yep.
Now, just bearing in mind that you started at the TMO on the 25th of February 2013, yes. I just want to show you a document that very shortly predates your time there. It's TMO 100499908. And it's a TMO Programme Board of Minutes, TMO Programme Board Minute of the 17th of January 2013. You can see it there on the screen. And you can see that it was attended by Robert Black, Sasha Jevons and Anthony Parks. Just looking at its first page, is this a document that you might have seen at the time you joined the TMO?
I might have seen, it depends what's contained within it, then it's relevant to Grenfell. And then
let's, absolutely, let's look at page 3. And on page 3, under section 3, we can see a heading, Grenfell and Hidden Homes. Paul Duncan attended for this item, you see that?
Yep.
It says, and I don't want to read it all to you, but I'll just pick out the bits I want to ask you about. Mm-hmm. Under Grenfell Tower, it says, there was currently a £2 million overspend on the project for the Stage D cost plan. Mm-hmm. We were working with Appleyards to get back to the original budget, and costs for cladding and ventilation for the academy were currently being reviewed, and the same approach would be applied for Grenfell Tower. The specification had been for bespoke cladding, and cheaper options were now being considered. Did anyone, whether Peter Madison or Sasha Jevons, tell you when you arrived at the TMO that the Grenfell Tower project was £2 million over budget?
What I did learn soon after arrival, that the project had effectively stopped. There was a gap between Artelia's cost estimate and what Ledbetter's prices, but there was a problem with engaging with Ledbetter's, who Ledbetter's didn't seem engaged in the project, didn't seem to want the project. Artelia were going to try and get more information so they could tell us why there were this £2 million gap, so that they could understand what the differences were.
Yes, I think we're getting a bit ahead.
Yeah.
My question was a more precise one.
Yeah.
Did anyone at the TMO who was there already tell you that there was a £2 million overspend on the Grenfell Tower project for the Stage D costs plan, as this minute records?
Paul would have told me there was a gap. And probably that was 2 million. I can't remember what the figure was.
Thank you. Did anybody tell you that the costs for cladding were a candidate for cheaper options?
One of a number of things that have probably been looked at, but at this point, or shortly after this point, we rescoped the project.
Yes.
So everything within the project was under consideration again.
Yes. Okay. Did anybody tell you specifically, expressly, that cladding was a candidate for one of the cheaper options to get the spend down? Cladding.
I don't think at this stage, no.
No. Now, looking a bit lower down the page, you can see in the penultimate paragraph on that page, it says that Paul Duncan would keep executive team updated on progress in getting back to the £9.4 million budget. When you arrived, were you told what the budget was?
I would have been told a figure.
Was it 9.4 million?
Do you mean construction costs or total scheme?
Well, that's my next question. Did you understand what the overall budget was?
I think the overall budget was 9.4, 9.7 seems to, I can't remember exact figures.
No,
it
no.
changed, yeah.
Right, okay.
But that overall
Right.
total scheme costs were in that range.
Indeed. And did anybody tell you that of the overall costs, something like £8.5 million, 8.415 in fact, was for construction?
Yes.
They did. Now, is it right that when you arrived, the TMO were considering a re-procurement of the project? I think you've told us this in your evidence so far, but can you confirm?
Peter and I were both trying to understand the scheme, and that was the purpose of the meeting with Artelia, for them to give us some background as to how we'd got to this point in the project. At that stage, we effectively stopped the project and redefined it and rescoped it.
Yes. When you arrived,
Yep.
late February 2013, you were introduced to the Grenfell Tower project.
Yep.
Did anybody tell you at that point, we are looking to re-procure, or did that come later?
That came later. That came...
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask you to look at a TMO project review note of 11th of January 2013, so again before your arrival, TMO 008473332, please. This is a document, again, Mr. Gibson, you won't have seen at the time it was produced, because it predates your arrival by about 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. Is it a document you would have been shown when you did arrive?
It's possible if
Right.
we go to the...
If we look at page 1, paragraph 3, TMO concerned that Ledbetter suggested in a meeting prior to Christmas break that their estimated budget for the project is 2 million higher than Appleyard's Stage D cost plan. And just looking down at paragraphs 5, 6 and 7, or particularly 6 and 7, if Leadbitter are unable to meet the TMO budget, Allen advised that the TMO could re-procure via another framework such as LHC or through a full OGA EU process. Re-procurement would have possible 5 to 6 month delay to project with an estimated conclusion by June 2013 if a decision was taken by end of January. Now, when you arrived, late February, were you told at that time that there were discussions or considerations within the TMO about re-procurement?
No.
No. Were you aware that the design team had agreed to defer half their Stage D fee to ensure that the total cost for their services fell below the OJEU threshold?
I was aware that there appeared to be conflicting information. I'm not sure why. My understanding was that they wanted to innovate the costs to innovate the consultants to Leadbetter at that time, and I didn't really understand why that was being considered. There was confusion.
Yeah, I can see that. Let's move on to a different document. ART 401083, please. Now, this is a chain of emails in late February 2013. Well, certainly that's where it starts. And if we go to page 8 in this email run, it's a very long email chain. If we go to page 8 in it, this is the second one on the page here I want to show you, which is from Paul Duncan to Alan Dawson on the 27th of February 2013. Now, I think that was a mere 2 days after you'd arrived, but you were in the TMO by then, I think. Yes?
Yep.
Yes. And you can see that Paul Duncan says to Alan Dawson at Artelia, Alan, the TMO would like to try and keep the proposed heating system as it offers more benefits in the long run. Also, the current design of window offers better prevention for residents throwing items out, especially if the canopy is removed. And then he says this, if we look at VE, I suggest the following. And there's a long list of bullet points there. And you can see that he says in the second bullet point, look at alternative material for cladding. Now, do you remember being involved in any discussions when you arrived at this point with Paul Duncan about value engineering in relation to material for the cladding?
Not specifically.
Second bullet, yes. You don't remember that specifically. Now, he's listing a series of things that are to be considered, and as you can see from the list, remove generation works, remove cost for canopy, remove link bridge, remove crown, remove improvement, etc., etc. A lot of these things in that list are the removal of works from the project, yes? Did you know that at that point, Paul Duncan was looking to shrink the project in some respects, even if not specifically?
No, but I think following this, there was a full review of the project. So whatever was here, we stopped the project and we rescoped the project.
At the point, sorry, I'm going to cut. I know because we're going to look at this in due course. We're going to take this step by step through the history, but I want to know what happened at the beginning. Just looking at this email and seeing the sense of what he's proposing, did you understand at the time, even though you may not have seen this email on the day it was sent, that the TMO were looking at reducing the scope of the project?
I don't think I must have, because when I reviewed the project, I identified issues with the link bridge. So I can't have been told before that there was suggestion to remove it as one thing. I know that there was the Crown has a reference, and I recall that, but I don't specifically recall. Looking at alternative materials would be a normal thing to do.
Now, he describes it as value engineering, but actually it's a reduction in the scope of the project. Did you see, or would you have seen a difference in those two concepts? Value engineering on the one hand and reduction in scope on the other?
Yes.
Yes. So, at least in respect of the things that he was removing, that wasn't value engineering at all. That was simply cutting things out.
Yes.
Yes. Now, can I ask you to look at the email the day before, which is at pages 2 to 3 of this email? No, let me try a different email run. ART 405911, please. I think this is where we see it. Yes, Alan Dawson, 26th of February to Bruce Soanes. Again, you didn't see this, but at pages 2 and 3 of this email run, can I just show you this? This is Alan Dawson asking Studio E for a radical rethink. 26th of February, bottom of page 2, over to page 3. And as I say, this is between Artelia and Studio E. Mm-hmm. And he says, gents, as you are aware, can you see at the top of page 3, as you are aware, there is currently a significant deficit between the approved costs plan / budget and the initial figures coming back from Leadbitter, not least of which on the external facade and general fit-out, where we are as much as £483,000 and £1.24 million apart respectively. Clearly we have to reconcile, but moreover bridge this gap as a matter of some urgency. Your urgent assistance in this regard would therefore be appreciated. Can you come back to us with a radical rethink of the scope / spec while still meeting the original brief by early part of next week to deliver it within budget? Now, did you know when you arrived that these discussions were going on between Artelia and Studio E about a radical rethink of the scope / spec for the Grenfell Tower project?
No.
You weren't. And then if you go over to the first page of this email run and look at the bottom of that page and the second, top of the second page, you can see Bruce Soanes' response. And he says, Alan, it's not really possible to undertake a radical rethink without sight of the figures, a discussion with the client, and the involvement with the services engineer, who is not copied into your email. Is the M&E not under review as well? And then he goes on at the top of page 2. The obvious targets for savings are, and then look at the second bullet point, change zinc cladding material to something cheaper. Mm-hmm. I think planning will need a sweetener to swallow this, perhaps copper, ceramic, terracotta, or more glass at low level. Were you involved in any discussion at this time, on your arrival, or perhaps shortly after, about changing the zinc cladding to a cheaper material?
I recall seeing this, but if you can give me the time of this email again, the date of this email?
The time of this email is the 26th of February at 11:48 in the morning. So
sorry, I meant the date.
The date, yes. But it does go, I should just show you, to Peter Madison and Paul Duncan, because they're copied in on it.
Yeah.
So you might have seen this, do you think?
This is familiar, but I don't think I would have seen it at that date.
Do you remember having a discussion with Peter Madison or Paul Duncan about changing the zinc cladding to a cheaper material?
No.
You don't. Can I then take you to TMO 1002602, please? This is an email from Bruce Soanes on the 17th of April 2013 to Peter Madison, and this time you are copied in. Mm-hmm. And he says on the second page of that email, if I can just show you that, he says, going beyond the meeting, can you just see under samples, he says, going beyond the meeting, I think it is worthwhile circulating the samples we've been collecting of alternative cladding options to zinc, mm-hmm. and then there's an image that's referred to, and then a long list of coated aluminium ACM products. Do you see those? Mm-hmm. And they're all Duragloss, mm-hmm. except the 8th, which is Rhine zinc. There are 8 there. Yep. And then underneath that, Marley Equitone cement particle board and others. Now, you got that at the time. Do you remember whether there was any discussion about what ACM was within the TMO?
No.
You got this email at the time. Did you know what coated aluminium ACM was?
No.
Did you ask Bruce Soanes to tell you?
I don't think I specifically did.
Were you not interested to know what ACM was, given that it was being bruited as an alternative cladding option to zinc?
The discussions, as I recall, were what does it look like, and little more than that. What would satisfy the planners? Because this was all, what material we used was all subject to planning agreement much later down the line. So these were alternative materials. There would have been discussions on costs, but not on performance.
As an educated client, and indeed in your case, an architect, were you not interested to understand what ACM was or what it was made of?
My understanding of it was aluminium sheeting with some form of insulation within it.
Were you not keen to understand what that, as you call it, form of insulation was within it?
No, because we were not expecting to be offered materials that would be not compliance. We weren't asking questions about compliance. We knew there was a requirement for us, for whatever materials we use and how they were put together, to be in accordance with regulations and legislation. So we weren't having that type of discussion.
Now, I understand the assumption you're working
Yeah.
from. I just wanted to know why it was. Well, let me ask it this way. Had you ever come across aluminium composite material in the course of your professional life before you received this email?
No.
And therefore, I do ask the question, being offered as an alternative a material that you'd never come across, why were you not curious to understand what it was made of?
I don't know. I mean, we weren't, because the discussions were over what's the choice of materials we have, how does that affect the cost plan, and is that acceptable to the planners?
And as part of what's the choice, you're being given a choice
Yep.
between zinc and an ACM product. Given that you've never come across ACM before, I'm just trying to understand why you, in particular, given your qualifications, didn't ask yourself, well, I wonder what that's made of.
My assumption, rightly or wrongly, was there were many properties in London with aluminium cladding, and this was aluminium cladding. I didn't think any further than that.
Right. Was there any discussion between you and anybody, Studio E or internally within the TMO, of why the ACM was cheaper than zinc?
No.
Did you ask yourself, I wonder why it's cheaper than zinc?
I just assumed it's a different manufacturing process, a different supplier, different methods of manufacture. It's not the sort of... No, there's no...
Right. Did you have any understanding at that point about how much investigation Studio E had done into the suitability of ACM panels in place of zinc as the cladding material for the rain screen at Grenfell?
No.
Do I take it from that answer that you never had a conversation with Studio E about the differences?
No.
Why is that?
The discussions we were having, as I stated, was What does it look like? Is it acceptable to the planners? And what's the cost? It wasn't, discussions weren't any further than that because we weren't expecting to be offered anything that might not be compliant. That was not a consideration.
Okay, let's come back to rain screen panels later. Can we move on in the story to March 2013? Please go to TMO 10038883. These are the minutes of the TMO Programme Board of the 25th of March 2013. And you are recorded as... well, you're not recorded, but I think you were in attendance with Peter Madison and Paul Duncan, not on this page, but on a different part of it, but for the Hidden Homes Grenfell item. If you go down, scroll down a little bit, you can see under the heading Grenfell Tower, do you see? Mm-hmm. Peter Madison, Paul Duncan and David Gibson attended for this and the Hidden Homes agenda items. Yep. So although you weren't recorded at the top of the document, you were certainly there. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, we can see there's some background in the second paragraph, and in the last paragraph at the bottom of the page it says, there has been no clear audit trail to explain how decisions were made. Do you see that? Was that a concern that Peter Madison had raised with you before this meeting?
We were both picking up the project pretty cold, and it was difficult to understand how decisions had been made. No clear audit trail. Yes, I was at the meeting, but I can't... Is it decisions about materials? Is it decisions about design? Is it decisions about scope? I don't know.
No, all I'm asking you is whether what we see recorded there had been the subject of a prior conversation between you and Peter Madison before this meeting.
I can't specifically recall.
Right, but certainly did you share his concern that there had indeed been no clear audit trail to explain previous decisions on this project?
Yes.
Was Peter Madison being critical of how Mark Anderson had run the project up to this point, which had led to this failure of an audit trail?
I think it was just a factual position statement, not necessarily criticism of anyone.
Well, you say that, Mr. Gibson, with respect. That isn't right, is it? A statement that there has been no clear audit trail to explain how decisions were made is clearly a criticism, isn't it?
It is.
Yes, and is it not a criticism of those who were in charge of this project up to this point? Certainly before Peter Madison and you took over.
Yes.
And therefore it's a criticism, isn't it, of Mark Anderson's handling of the project, at least in that respect.
If you follow that logic, yes.
Is there anything wrong with the logic?
No, but you possibly widened it out more than I might have.
Let's turn the page, please. Fifth paragraph down. You see it says there, procurement would be an issue as the project was recommended to board on the basis that we were doing it this way for efficiency savings. Did you know what the issue was that was being referred to there?
I think the efficiency was you had using the contractors and consultants to take the scheme forward was to realise efficiencies and efficiencies in cost to the scheme because it would be a single contractor.
Is that a polite way of saying that the efficiency savings were savings that would be made from not having a re-procurement because you could use the existing teams on calc and not have an OJEU limit?
Sorry, I'm not understanding.
Well, let me try it a different way. Were the efficiency savings from not having a re-procurement exercise, in truth, monetary savings by avoiding OJEU limits by using existing teams appointed on calc. And the problem was that a reprocurement would spoil that exercise, would spoil the efficiency savings.
My understanding is that we're looking back historically at this point. I'm trying to understand the minute in context.
Yeah. Well, okay. The context is the question of, let's perhaps look at the previous paragraph,
Yeah.
it might help you. The question to be answered is, should we be trying to get the scheme delivered or get back to market and manage it differently, i.e. reprocure or not do it at all?
Yeah.
Procurement would be an issue, as the project was recommended to board on the basis that we were doing it this way for efficiency savings.
Yeah.
My question is, were the efficiency savings, which would arise from not having a reprocurement exercise, be essentially the savings you would make by avoiding OJEU limits because you are using the existing teams from calc?
No, I'm not interpreting that way. The way I'm interpreting that is there had been a previous report to board recommending the way we were doing it was because of efficiency savings.
Indeed. And why would, well, then you tell me, why would procurement be an issue?
Because linked it to the paragraph above, the question to be answered is, should we be trying to get the scheme delivered or get back to market and manage it differently, i.e. reprocure or not do it at all? So we were reviewing the scheme at this time.
Well, I'm suggesting to you that the problem with reprocurement is that it would cost more because you wouldn't have the benefit of using the previous.
I think at this time the problem with reprocurement might be the length of time it would take.
Well, that's not the reason given in the minute as the issue, by which I take it means problem, is it? Efficiency savings isn't time, it's money, isn't it? Or have I got that wrong?
No, I think it's a recognition that the board had previously been advised that the way they were going to deliver the project and procure it, they were doing it for efficiency savings. We are now reviewing that and recognising that this is the recommendation that had previously gone to the board, and we would have to go back and say we were going to do it another way for potential efficiency savings, which there's a bit of a conflict there.
I follow. If we look at the next paragraph, it says, Peter has spoken to Laura Johnson about the present situation and also mentioned the board, so hopefully, I think it should be to the board.
Yeah.
So hopefully there will not be a huge issue if we say we need to start again. Paul is working with the architects to look at alternative.
Mm-hmm.
What discussions did you have with Studio E at this stage? We can see that Paul that's Paul Duncan. Were you working with the architects to look at alternatives?
No, at this stage, I and Peter together were meeting with Artelia to understand the project, how we got to where we were, and what we needed to do to re-engage with the project.
Right. Now, Laura Johnson, just to be clear, is RBKC, not TMO, isn't
Yes.
it? Yes. Were you present when Peter Madison spoke to Laura Johnson about the present situation, as this minute records?
Was I present?
Yes. Were you part of the...
Sorry. I wasn't party to the meeting with Peter and Laura, no.
Right. Now, we have seen, well, you've, I think, told us already that Laura Johnson had threatened to remove Leadbitters from Calc and Grenfell at the start of January 2013. We saw that from the documents that predate your arrival. But was it your understanding that Laura Johnson of RBKC would have a say on whether the Grenfell project should be reprocured?
No. I think Peter was, but no, I wasn't expecting her to have a say. My recollection at this time was that Peter and I had both reviewed the project. We had a number of questions about the project and its scope, and Peter was going to talk to Laura Johnson, and that was about the scope of the project and where we were with the discussions with Ledbetter, that they didn't seem engaged, no more than that. So I'm not aware of any, that Peter would need direction from Laura Johnson.
Why would it be anything to do with RBKC that the scope of the project was perhaps smaller than it otherwise was going to be to start with?
I had raised questions when I looked at it because I didn't understand why we were fitting out a nursery and a boxing club within the base of this tower block. There were other options for that space. So I think I'd raised that, why are we doing this? How has that been signed off? Peter was going to clarify these issues with Laura Johnson, and I believe he came back and said, Laura has clarified the boxing club nursery, they're committed to it as a social thing, it's important to them. So that stopped that discussion. There were certain things that we needed to clarify, how much she understood of what was in the project, and was she agreeing in an agreement with that scope, and he got that response.
Why was it necessary to seek her agreement to the new scope or discussions about scope?
You were spending RBKC money on something that possibly didn't have a clear audit trail on decision making, and we wanted to clarify, are you comfortable with this scope? What's in, what's out, not the detail of the design, but in terms of the scope of the project, of the nursery, of the boxing club, which was a reasonable amount of money in the scheme.
Now, looking two further paragraphs down the page, it says, the recommendation from Peter is for us to reprocure. Mm-hmm. You see that?
Yep.
Now, at this stage, I think you hadn't received the breakdown of Ledbetter's proposed costs, had you? What did you understand Peter Madison was recommending about reprocurement at this point, given that you hadn't yet had the Ledbetter's revision of their costs?
I think it's a discussion that Peter and I had. If anyone had asked me at this time what my recommendation would have been, it would have been reprocure.
Right.
We did not feel that Ledbetter were the right. They weren't engaged. They had no history of we didn't know of any history, and we were asking our Artelia, etc., to help us in what work they'd done. But from our point of view, we had complex, high-rise, overcloud building, complex M&E, and residence in situ. I would not have promoted going to a framework in order to get a contractor fit to deliver that works. My recommendation, and I think we took the sensible approach, would have been we look for a contractor who's experienced in this type of works, which is ultimately what we did. But we did go on a journey of understanding where we were with Ledbetter. We explored other options of, I think, with the LHC framework, but that put us in the same position as it would have been with Ledbetter, in that it wasn't a procurement exercise carried out specifically for this building, and I would have said reprocure. So I don't think Peter is looking at what he's got, and I agree, in the situation we were in, we need to understand where we were, and we need to understand where we were going. But this is not, if we had been on it from the start, this is not how we would have chosen to procure the project.
I understand. So I think what you're saying is, coming into it fresh,
Yeah.
you and Peter Madison looked at the project and thought it just needs to be reprocured, even though, well, regardless of the cost question.
Regardless of the cost question.
Regardless
Well,
of the fact that Leadbitter were 2 million over.
No, that was a factor, but we had a disengaged contractor, so we didn't appear to be going anywhere with Leadbitter. They weren't coming to the table to explain their costs, and we want to rescope the project anyway.
Right.
But there were benefits in going to the open market.
Yes, I see. It then goes on to say, in the same paragraph, we will wait till next week's deadline for Leadbitters to come back with a breakdown and reasons for gaps in costs. If the information is not forthcoming or we still cannot reach an agreement, then we should proceed by using an existing framework. It looks from that as if, this is Peter's this is a decision, it looks from that as if the decision of the meeting was that even though Peter Madison wanted to reprocure, and you, I think, were in agreement with that, nonetheless, you should wait to see what Leadbitters came up with by way of better figures. Is that fair?
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we then go to Alan? Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the clock.
Yes, so you're going to a new topic.
I'm going to it's a new topic and a new document, and it'll take more than 5 minutes to do the document, but I'm anxious to use 4 minutes where I can, so I think I might start on it.
Well, you can read the document, then we can rise.
Well, we can look at the document and ask. Let's see how we go. Can we? It's an email from Paul Duncan to Alan Dawson on the 27th of February, which we looked at before, so it's fairly familiar. This is at ART 401083. This is the series of emails in late February 2013, Mr. Gibson, the first of which is on the 26th of February, and we saw that before. In this reference, it's at page 11. We can just go down to that. He says there that there's this significant deficit between the approved cost plan stroke budget and the initial figures. And I showed you that before. This is the Radical Rethink email, so we're familiar with that.
Yes.
And at the bottom of page 8, if we scroll up to that, we can see that on that page, Paul Duncan sets out a revision, and we've seen that, and it goes over to page 9. Now, as I say, this was very early on in your role. In your role at the TMO, I think you told us you may have known about this but had no role in this. Is that right?
I think that's correct. Yes.
Right. Then we're moving on then to page 7 in this. We're moving up the chain and therefore later in time. We can see Alan Dawson's response on the 1st of March, bottom of page 7. And you're not copied in on this, so that may be a clue to your involvement. If we go to page 8 at the top, we can see that he attaches a draft reprocurement programme. You see that? And follows the dates that are set out in Paul Duncan's email. And then if we look at page 5 in this email run, this is an email sent by Paul Duncan on the 27th of March, so later in March. So you've now been at the TMO a month. And it says, David, please issue programme at your earliest convenience. We would also like cost analysis if the TMO reprocured this project to include abortive fees, outstanding fees and additional fees. You see that? Is that something that you had an involvement in at this time? Did you discuss a request for a cost analysis if the TMO reprocured?
I can't recall.
You can't recall. Moving up the email, we get to an email on page 3 from Robert Powell, 3rd of April 2013. This is to Paul Duncan, He says, good afternoon, Paul, conscious that we owe you a short paper on the VE options shopping list in relation to Grenfell, along with comment on the LHC framework. I've spoken to Simon Cash today, he says. He goes on to say in the last paragraph of that page, accordingly, I plan to issue a status report to you next week. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a response to that on the 10th of April at page 2, setting out some requirements from Paul Duncan. Do you see that? This is to Robert Powell. You're not copied in on this, but again, I just want to show it to you. Mm-hmm. And he says, good afternoon, Robert, just to confirm our requirements. Were those requirements that you had discussed with Paul Duncan before he sent this email? Do you think? And just looking down, he goes on to say, Appleyards to advise us of the current position, stroke design, and likelihood of delivering the project within the TMO's allowed budget of 8.5 million construction cost.
This seems to me to be familiar. By this stage, myself and Peter would have met with Appleyards to understand the current position, and I think Paul is making a reference. So I would have been involved in the background.
You were involved by this stage?
Yes.
In the background
Yeah.
of this. Thank you, that's very helpful. Mr. Chairman, that is a convenient moment, because I'm now going to go, having set that up, to the substantive response document to this, which will come after lunch, I think.
Yes. All right, thank you very much. Well, we're going to have a break now, Mr. Gibson, so we can all get some lunch. I'll give Mr. Millett the benefit of 2 minutes, so we'll come back at 2 o'clock, please. And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. $2 o'clock, please, Mr. Millett.
Yes.
Thank you.